The outcry from the death of President Hugo Chavez last week has been varied. The people of Venezuela have come together under one brow of mourning, and many heads of state have sent out their condolences. Now, in contrast, news reports from the US seem to regard the passing of the President Chavez as a positive turn, with critics referring to Chavez as a totalitarian thug. Now, the wake of Chavez's death does not only stir questions about the North and South American continents, but may also have global repercussions. For South Africans, a country which imports its oil from OPEC, the political future of Venezuela, or one of OPEC's main oil exporting nations, may have a certain economic implication on our country. Now, today we're joined by esteemed political analyst Daniel Silke, who looks to the future to determine the tides of the global change and volatility. And he's of course a very sought-after economic affairs specialist, a former city councillor in the city of Cape Town, and member of Parliament. Mr. Silke, it's great to have you here this morning talking about this very relevant topic right now in the world.
Yes, this has been a weekend of Chavez, and I think the world has looked at him with many different eyes. Speak to two analysts about Chavez, you'll get 4 different opinions on whether he was good or bad for the world. Some Venezuelans loved him, some Venezuelans hated him. Yeah. We know that his relationship with the United States was pretty bad from the get-go, and for most Americans, he was the devil incarnate in a sense. He, of course, regarded many Americans as the devil, and he spoke about George Bush in the early Bush years as being the devil. Yeah. So this is a controversial global personality who has now passed on, but I think his legacy is going to live on in a number of respects.
Now, for those who might not be too well informed on the history between the United States and Venezuela and how that tension came about, just paint a brief picture for us.
Well, Chavez came into power on a ticket that was broadly a socialist political platform. This is diametrically opposed, of course, to the more free market capitalist orientation of the United States, and Chavez used an anti-US, anti-capitalist theme of his politics to distance himself from the US, and he used this anti-Americanism to stir up a nationalistic fervor in Venezuela and to present himself as the bulwark against American imperialism and colonialism. And this kind of populist feel, of course, kept him in power. It encouraged his supporters, especially in an era in which George Bush himself was seen as a controversial global political figure.
Indeed. And now, of course, the world knows that Venezuela has surpassed Saudi Arabia as the world's greatest holder of oil reserves. So how will this play out in the bigger global market?
Well, Venezuela has used its oil reserves clearly as part of its foreign policy. It has subsidized relatively cheap oil exports to some of its neighbors to curry favor with its neighbors, particularly Cuba. It has tried to keep the oil price high because, after all, it needs a high oil price in order to gain revenues to feed its people and to provide the social services that Chavez did provide for his people. Now, with him gone, there may well be a view that Venezuela needs to encourage foreign investment. There's an opportunity now, with him out of the picture, for American oil companies to look at re-entering the Venezuelan market, perhaps pump more oil out of Venezuela than has been the case in the past. And in fact, strangely enough, this could see some amelioration of the high oil price that we've seen if US companies come in and can in fact pump more oil out. And I think they're knocking at the door of the Venezuelan business leaders at the moment, the politicians at the moment, Chevron, US oil companies, waiting to enter that market if there's some sort of rapprochement between, of course, the successors to Chavez and the United States.
Yeah. Now, of course, I mean, we in South Africa are having to deal with escalating oil prices affecting our petrol prices and so on. How will we see this panning out in South Africa? Will there actually be an effect on us?
Well, I think still we have to be realistic about who controls the oil price. And you correctly said OPEC, which is the oil-producing, exporting countries, led by and large by Saudi Arabia, they set the oil price. So no matter what Venezuela does, and we expect to see Venezuela continue to pump similar levels of oil, perhaps increasing levels of oil, it's still up to the Saudis, it's still up to the Emiratis or the Kuwaitis or the Bahrainis to really negotiate specific oil prices for their needs. And Venezuela really, I don't think, has got enough clout in itself as a country to affect this. But if they can pump more oil out of Venezuela, it becomes more difficult for the Saudis to control oil, the oil price of oil at the high levels that we've seen. So there may be some implication for this down the line, but not for the moment.
Well, and then lastly, how do you see the future kind of panning out globally? Because we have, you know, the world seems to be in a state of constant change. Presidents are changing. Libya, Egypt, the United States, now Venezuela. The election is coming up pretty soon. How do you see the future?
You know, each country is different, and each circumstance is absolutely different. We've seen certainly a number of the dictators of this world fall over the course of the last while. Strange enough, 1 or 2 of these dictators were friends, of course, of Mr. Chavez, including Mr. Gaddafi in Libya. We've seen strained relations with, in Syria, another friend of Mr. Chavez. Another friend of Mr. Chavez is the Iranian president, Ahmadinejad. All of these big men, let us say, around the world, all of these relatively totalitarian or authoritarian leaders are under stress. There is a transition in the world at the moment, but the jury is out on what replaces these particular individuals or their style of government. In Venezuela, in particular, we will see a successor. There's a successor who has been anointed by Chavez. He will run for election. Will he continue this kind of anti-American policy? Well, I think he may well, for the moment, in the short term, to gain support. But in the medium to longer term, everyone needs business. Everybody needs oil, dollar investments into their country. And everyone is suffering from high social spending, demands from poor people. We all need economic growth. And I think the realities of that are going to change the world into the future.
Sir, thank you very much. Your insights are very, very well appreciated here at Expresso. Of course, talking about the very relevant topic, the passing of President Hugo Chavez and how that will affect the world. We'll be right back here on Expresso with more right after these.
Still to come.